My daughter's fever hit 104 degrees. 104 degrees. I could hear her tiny lungs gasping for air through the digital baby monitor clipped to my belt. The harsh, rattling wheeze of a 4-year-old whose body is actively failing to fight off an infection. I was standing in our custom, imported marble kitchen. I turned off the induction stove. I wiped my hands on a towel. I started walking toward the main staircase to get my child and take her to the emergency room. My mother-in-law, Beatrix, stepped directly into my path. She physically blocked the hallway. She was holding a crystal champagne flute, her jaw set in a rigid, furious line. A real wife doesn't abandon her husband's guests, Beatrix snapped, her voice a sharp, venomous hiss. Stop embarrassing this family. The caterers were in the next room. My husband's investors were already pulling their luxury vehicles into our circular driveway. I didn't argue. I didn't try to reason with her. I simply lowered my shoulder and pushed past her heavy silk dress. I made it exactly 2 steps up the carpeted stairs before my husband, Thatcher, grabbed my shoulder. He spun me around. Thatcher slapped me across the face. He hit me with a closed, cupped palm. The impact was deafening. My head snapped back, so violently my vision blurred into a wash of white light. The sharp, stinging crack of skin on skin echoed off the vaulted ceilings of the foyer. I tasted copper. The warm, metallic tang of blood pooling against my bottom teeth. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't drop the heavy wool blanket I was holding. I just wiped the single drop of blood from my lip, adjusted my posture, and looked directly into his eyes. I realized in that exact second that I was going to take absolutely everything he had. I walked up the stairs. I wrapped my burning, shivering daughter in the blanket. I carried her down the back servants' staircase, bypassed the kitchen entirely, and walked out the rear utility door into the cold night air. I secured Sabina in her car seat. I sat in the driver's seat of my SUV. I locked the doors. I made exactly 1 phone call. I didn't call the police. A domestic violence charge would only tie us up in family court for years, giving him leverage and joint custody while the system crawled. I called Winslow. Winslow was the senior managing partner of the boutique corporate law firm that handled my private holding company. Winslow, I said, my voice completely devoid of any tremor. I am taking Sabina to the emergency room. Thatcher assaulted me. Initiate the absolute freeze. Do not wait for morning. Understood, Vivian, he replied. The line went dead. I drove to the pediatric emergency room with a bloody lip and a child burning through her clothes. Thatcher thought I was a submissive, dependent housewife. He thought he was the undisputed king of a castle he built. He didn't know about the $25,000 I quietly transferred into our joint lifestyle account every single month. $25,000. $25,000 of my own liquid capital, deposited like clockwork, so he could play the role of the wealthy, successful provider. I don't know if you're watching this on your phone or on your lunch break, but tell me in the comments. What is the most expensive thing you've ever paid for just to keep the peace in your house? I played the dutiful peacekeeper for 4 exhausting years. I had built a massive, highly profitable commercial real estate portfolio long before I ever met Thatcher. But when we got married, his pride couldn't handle it. Every time I closed a commercial acquisition larger than his annual salary, he would subject me to 3 weeks of agonizing, punishing silent treatment. He would criticize my mothering. He would undermine my decisions in front of Sabina. He would make the air in our home utterly unbreathable. So I bought my peace. I hid my net worth behind a labyrinth of blind trusts and anonymous LLCs. I stepped down from my public role as a CEO, demoting myself to a silent, unseen partner in my own firm. I let Thatcher manage the day-to-day checking accounts to stroke his ego. I let him boast to his golfing friends about his market acumen, while my secret deposits funded the very air he breathed. If you have ever shrunk your own ambition just to make a weak man feel tall, hit the subscribe button right now. You are going to love exactly how this ends. The triage nurses at the pediatric ER took Sabina immediately. They hooked her to a saline 4 drip. They administered heavy doses of antipyretics to bring her core temperature down from the seizure risk threshold. She finally fell into a deep, exhausted, medicated sleep. I sat in the hard plastic chair next to her hospital bed. The room smelled sharply of bleach and sterile iodine. I reached into the deep pocket of my wool coat. I pulled out a thick, wax-sealed envelope. An hour before the slap, Thatcher had tossed this exact envelope onto the marble kitchen island. It was addressed to my maiden name, sent directly from the county clerk's office of property records. "More of your junk mail, Vivian," he had scoffed, not even looking up from his crystal glass. I had slipped it into my pocket on my way to the stairs. I thought my primary holding company was impenetrable. I thought my assets were perfectly insulated from his arrogance. I was wrong. I broke the wax seal with my thumbnail. I unfolded the heavy stock paper under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of the hospital room. It was a physical rejection notice from the county clerk. Attached to the rejection letter was a copy of a quitclaim deed. Thatcher and Beatrix had tried to file a legal transfer of property. They had covertly drafted a deed to transfer the absolute ownership of the $6.2 million mansion out of my hidden LLC and directly into an irrevocable trust controlled entirely by Beatrix. They tried to steal the very cage they had locked me in. I stared at the signature line on the second page. It was my signature. Perfect loops, perfect pressure. He had forged my name. But a quitclaim deed requires more than just a forged signature. It requires a physical, state-licensed public notary to witness the signing and stamp the document. Thatcher had bribed a notary from his own mid-level investment firm to stamp the fraudulent transfer. But the county clerk's office is a machine of bureaucracy. The clerk rejected the deed because the notary's commission seal had expired exactly 3 days before the document was dated. A clerical error. A tiny, microscopic oversight by an arrogant man who thought he was untouchable. Had that stamp been valid, they would have stolen the roof over my daughter's head while I was busy plating their caviar. Hit the subscribe button if you agree that the best place to orchestrate a man's financial ruin is from the sterile waiting room of a pediatric ER. I sat in the quiet hospital room and analyzed the math of my own life. I downloaded a high-resolution scan of the rejected deed and securely emailed it to Winslow. I requested the attending ER physician to formally document Sabina's exact temperature upon arrival. I requested the charge nurse to formally photograph the dark, swelling bruise forming on my jawline. I built an absolute, airtight fortress of forensic evidence while the man who hit me was busy drinking scotch with his investors. We were discharged from the hospital at 5:30 a.m. The sky was a bruised, dark purple. I drove back to the mansion. I unlocked the back door and stepped into the kitchen at exactly 6 a.m. The house smelled of stale champagne, expensive cigar smoke, and catered food left out to rot. Thatcher was passed out on the custom velvet sofa in the living room, still wearing his tailored suit pants and a wrinkled dress shirt. I didn't wake him. I walked right past him. I walked upstairs, packed a single duffel bag with Sabina's essential clothing, and packed a secondary bag for myself. I carried my sleeping daughter out the back door and moved us directly into the detached guest house at the far edge of the property's acreage. I locked the reinforced steel door of the guest suite. At 10 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text message from Thatcher. "I lost my temper. You pushed me. Come back to the main house and make my espresso. We need to talk about your attitude." I stared at the glowing screen. I didn't write a paragraph explaining my pain. I didn't demand an apology. I didn't threaten him with divorce. I replied with a single, yellow thumbs-up emoji. I needed him totally calm while the trap closed. I needed him to think we were going through a standard, emotional domestic separation, not that I was systematically dismantling his entire life. Because I hadn't filed a police report, and because I sent that passive emoji, Thatcher assumed he had won. He assumed I was hiding in the guest house out of shame and submission. Drunk on his own ego, he had the absolute audacity to host another lavish brunch 4 days later. I sat by the window in the guest house. The glass was cold against my forehead. I watched the valet park luxury cars in my driveway. I watched catering staff carry silver trays of food into my kitchen. I could hear the faint sound of clinking glasses carrying across the manicured lawn. I maintained absolute, suffocating radio silence for 14 days. 14 days. I did not cross the lawn. I did not answer his calls. I let him spend the very last remnants of his fake, unearned status. Tell me in the comments. If you were holding that forged deed in the hospital, would you have confronted him that night, or waited the 14 days? Day 14 arrived on a Tuesday. Thatcher and Beatrix were sitting in the grand living room of the main house. I know this because Winslow's private security detail had secured the perimeter. At exactly 2 p.m., a heavy, authoritative knock echoed at the front oak doors. It was not a delivery. It was not a guest. It was Winslow. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit, flanked by 2 armed, off-duty police officers acting as process servers. I walked out of the guest house. I crossed the lawn and stood quietly at the top of the marble steps leading to the front portico. Thatcher opened the door. He was wearing a cashmere sweater, holding a half-empty glass of sparkling water. He looked at Winslow, then looked past him to the armed men. "What is this?" Thatcher demanded, his voice thick with unearned authority. Winslow did not smile. He stepped across the threshold. Winslow handed Thatcher a heavy, black legal binder. "This is formal, irrevocable notification of the immediate termination of your $25,000 monthly trust allowance," Winslow announced. His voice was entirely flat, echoing sharply in the foyer. Thatcher froze. He looked down at the binder. He opened the thick cover. He read the first page. It was the original, certified deed to the mansion, registered solely and permanently to my holding company. His vocal cords completely seized. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, raspy exhalation of air came out. The glass of sparkling water slipped from his suddenly numb fingers. It hit the marble floor and shattered violently, sending sharp shards of glass and cold water exploding across the polished stone. I watched the anatomical collapse of a narcissist in real time. The pupils of his eyes dilated massively. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, pale gray. His knees physically buckled, sagging under the crushing, suffocating realization of his absolute and sudden poverty. Beatrix rushed into the foyer from the living room. "What are you doing to my son?" she shrieked, her voice shrill and hysterical. "You can't do this. We own this home." Winslow calmly reached into the interior pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out the high-resolution color copy of the forged quitclaim deed. The one with the rejected, expired notary stamp. He held it up so the natural light from the doorway illuminated the forged signature. "One more sound, Beatrix," Winslow stated, his tone dropping to a lethal whisper. "And I submit this directly to the district attorney. Conspiracy to commit real estate fraud carries a mandatory minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary." Beatrix's mouth snapped shut. She went completely, terrifyingly silent. The private security team moved past them without asking permission. The heavy, metallic clack of the smart locks being manually replaced and reprogrammed echoed through the long hallway. Thatcher was physically escorted off the property by the armed process servers. He was served a strict 24-hour eviction notice for his remaining personal items. Due to the meticulously documented hospital records of his medical neglect, combined with the time-stamped photographs of the physical assault, I secured total, sole primary custody of Sabina within 30 days. He was granted 0 visitation. My home is quiet now. I sit in the sunroom of the mansion. The heavy oak doors are secured. The perimeter cameras are active. Sabina is completely healthy. She is quietly painting at a small wooden table in the corner, the afternoon sunlight catching her hair. The wealth protects us. The legal fortress is absolute. I still flinch slightly when a heavy door slams unexpectedly. The financial victory is total, but the psychological scar of betrayal requires permanent vigilance. I do not regret the silence. I do not regret the trap. If the walls around you were never really theirs, how long would you stay silent? Like this video to seal your own boundaries. Subscribe to this channel. We don't just survive toxic environments, we quarantine them. Next week, I explain exactly how to reverse engineer a narcissist smear campaign using a single certified letter. He hit me to prove he was the master of the house. He forgot I owned the deed. Silence. Hard cut.